FM. You can also listen to it online if you have nothing better to do in your day between 6 and 10 in the morning. But we'd love to have you. Now, one of the things that we do at our station that I'm very proud of is there's a guy named Tom Russell who came down from New York. He served in the armed forces, and he started a program called Step Up for Soldiers, where he wanted for guys that came back with physical injuries to build a ramp. He had too much time on his hands. His wife said, get out of the house, do something with your time. So he started out building ramps, and just a few years later he started building more ramps, more people joined. He now has built a gym for a soldier that is blind now and still in active duty, but he's building a gym for this person to help train other people who are also blind. But here's the fascinating part about where this brotherhood that you mentioned is so fascinating to me, who has not served. He started sending what's called packages from home. You saw those boxes in that gentleman's slide that look like FedEx boxes, or they're actually postal service boxes, the white ones. This past December, last June, we raised enough money to send 85 of those boxes filled with all sorts of stuff to remind those guys, men and women that are serving over there, that we care. In December, we sent over 200 of those boxes. And that was all privately raised money and funds and donations from restaurants and people. And it was an amazing endeavor. And so Tom Russell brings that to our area like Jerry does here. And so Jerry, my hat's off to you. It's amazing what you do. I really appreciate what you do. Now, I'm trying to get started here. I did find something fascinating when I arrived. I saw this. You all have this on your table. And if you ever go to a Democrat fundraiser, something like Democrats, they always have taxpayer-funded nonprofits on these sheets of paper. You guys actually have businesses on here. This is pretty impressive. Now, how many of you have internet access? Internet access. That funny thing, or as Al Gore says it, you know, what he invented. Yeah. I tell you what's amazing. My dad is a prolific user of the internet. He sends emails. I don't know how he survived before. Between talk radio and the internet, Dad's life is full and complete and rich for some reason. But he sent me this thing the other day, and I said, y'all, several of you have probably heard it, but I thought it was funny. It was about a family, whole family gathered in a room, and their son, or whatever, relative, had an injury, and the doctor came out and says, you know, we got some bad news. We've got a new experimental procedure that's going to make everything fine. It's a brain transplant. And because of Obamacare, the expenses are covered, but you have to buy the brain. The family's like, ugh. He says, and we have found through testing of these brains, that the wiring on the brains are a little different between Democrats and Republicans. Now, the Democrat brain is $5,000. Republican brain is only $200. It's your choice, what you want to do. Of course, the Democrat members of the family are very proud and smiling, yes, $5,000 for brain. $200 Republican brain. And one family member said, why? Why is the Republican brain so cheap? And the doctor says, well, it's been used. It's actually... So I have to thank my dad for that one. So I'll make sure. Now, you guys have a wonderful guy by the name of Bill Owen down here, right? Now, I want you to pray for his health, because we're all good, fun-loving Americans. I don't want him to die on an operating table. I do not want him to die in a hospital or anytime soon. I want you guys to soundly defeat him in an election, okay? So may he live long enough to be defeated in an election by the fine people down here, okay? You with me on that? Yeah. Okay. Second thing, you got a guy named Tim Spear down here.
Who?
Well said. Couldn't say it better myself. But I would like for you, there's a number, Kim Cotton has handed out these numbers. I used to work with Kim West. Ouch, that hurts. She's put all these numbers. She's not promoting Tim Spear to you guys by any stretch. I got a call from Dallas Woodhouse, and if any of you have ever heard or know of Dallas Woodhouse from Americans for Prosperity, he's pretty persistent. In fact, he's called me 3 times since I've been sitting at this table tonight. I have not taken those calls. But I do want you to take yourself. How many of you have cell phones? A bunch of you? You know, you might not know it or not. These things have more power than it took to send a man to the moon in 1969. Isn't that amazing? The camera, calculator, it also serves as a phone. But I'd like for you, if you don't have it on vibrate or silent, please do that. But also that number, put that number in your phone, and make sure between now and Tuesday you call Tim Spear. Be respectful, be nice, don't say boo on the phone, but make sure you talk to him, because we're going to have votes on charter schools and voter ID. In fact, the hearing on photo ID is going to be on Tuesday. And so you want to make sure you let Tim know how you feel about these things, because it's going to be hard for dead people to get voter IDs. Maybe not in Washington County, or most other places. I would like to thank all of you for allowing me to come up here today. I have a wonderful time in Wilmington. I have to pick on the Republicans a little bit because you're going to a taxpayer-funded convention center in June. The thing loses $80,000 a month of taxpayer money. But it's really pretty, and it's right there on the water, but you're going to have fun down there. And we're here talking about Ronald Reagan and Abraham Lincoln. These are two truly remarkable human beings, but they're not necessarily any different than any of you in this room. And probably their outlook and their view on life. And it's important to recognize where they were at their respective times in history, because you are at just as important a time in our nation's history as were they. The stakes are different, but equally as high. You had one in Lincoln, a guy who had suffered depression, many political defeats. In 1854, the Whigs and the Democrats were the party of choice. And these upstart little group called the Republicans came along, and within 6 years, as you heard earlier, they had a president named Lincoln. As he stood on that podium that day, looking out over the crowds for his inauguration, he was looking at the dissolution of the Union. This was a country at that point in time that had the equivalent of 2 world wars in their recent memory, the Revolution and the War of 1812. This was a country that would see 480-some thousand of its fellows brothers die on the battlefields across this great country, east of the Mississippi. It was an astounding, terrifying time. Jefferson Davis had just been sworn in as the President of the Confederacy 2 weeks earlier, and Lincoln was standing there. And what would he have done, and what would he have said today? But one of the things he did say in that inauguration, it's hard. Lincoln spoke in vast terms. If you ever go to the Lincoln Memorial in D.C., it's got an amazing thing, the Gettysburg Address, only 400 and some words. His inaugural you don't see often because it's thousands of words long. I don't know how long it took, and I'm sure people took naps. But one of the things he said was, by the frame of the government under which we live, this same people have wisely given their public servants but little power for mischief, and have with equal wisdom provided for the return of that little to their own hands at very short intervals. While the people retain their virtue and vigilance, no administration, by any extreme of wickedness or folly, can be very seriously injure the government in the short span of 4 years. What would he have thought of the Obama administration today? Really? He challenged many of the conventional things of wisdom of his day. He took on keeping the country together, and because of those actions and the courage of the people at that time, we have this country today. Roll it forward about a century later, and you have Reagan, Ronald Wilson Reagan, who challenged his party to uphold conservative principles. A former Democrat became Republican. He stood steadfast against communism and understood the power of capitalism. That was the fundamental difference between us and the Soviet Union, 2 of the greatest military powers in the history of the world. And Reagan knew that dollar for dollar, capitalism would win. And when Khrushchev said, your children will live in communism, Reagan said, no, your children will live in freedom. And they have. But look at the fights that they took on. Reagan took on the unions. You see the shadow of Reagan in Wisconsin today. Reagan fired the air traffic controllers. I don't remember a lot of complaints about it. There were a few union people that were upset. He fired them, but the planes kept rolling, and it was fine. And the country benefited. Look at the energy crisis. Look when Reagan took over. Gas prices were accelerating. There was rationing of gas. You had to, in some states, you had to get Tuesdays and Thursdays versus Mondays and Wednesdays. We weren't going to have any more oil. Remember that we were running out. We're using roughly 2 or 3 times as much as we were then. We were running out then. And his response was, get government out of the way. Lower taxes. And you saw one of the greatest periods of economic expansion in world history. As George Will said, I think 140 months plus of economic growth. An astounding time. But he was unwavering and unflinching. One of the things he said then, we, Americans, were meant to be masters of destiny, not victims of fate. Who among you would trade America's future for that of any other country on the planet? And who could possibly have so little faith in our America that they would trade our tomorrows for our